I was in labor, bringing our child into the world, while he was in our bed with my best friend. I thought I had it all, until the people I trusted most destroyed everything. Part 1. Before everything fell apart. My name is Emily. I'm 32 years old, and up until a year ago, I believed my life was nearly perfect. I met Jake in college. He was quiet, confident, and thoughtful in ways that made you feel seen, like you mattered even in a room full of noise. We weren't flashy, and maybe that's what I loved most about us. We were solid, steady. The couple others came to for advice. We got married young, built our careers side by side, and eventually bought a modest home in the suburbs. Then came the most exciting moment of our lives. I got pregnant. We weren't trying, but we weren't not trying either. When the test turned positive, Jake scooped me up laughing, twirling me in the kitchen like we were the only two people in the world. That night, he talked to my belly like she could already hear him. I fell asleep thinking I had everything I ever wanted. At 6 months pregnant, my childhood best friend, Kelsey, hit a rough patch. She'd broken up with her boyfriend and got kicked out of her apartment after losing her job. I didn't think twice. I offered her our guest room. Jake hesitated for a second, just a second, but then smiled. "Of course," he said, "she's family." I should have seen the signs then, but I didn't. The thing about betrayal is that it rarely starts with fireworks or lies. It starts with subtle shifts. A laugh that lasts a bit too long, a glance that lingers, a locked door when it never used to be. But I was focused on nesting, on doctor appointments, on baby showers and prenatal yoga. I told myself I was imagining things, until I couldn't anymore. 3 days before I went into labor, I walked into the kitchen and caught Jake quickly putting his phone face down. He smiled too quickly. Kelsey appeared 2 minutes later, her hair damp from a shower she hadn't taken in the upstairs bathroom. I felt a chill that didn't come from the weather. But again, I shook it off. Jake was perfect. Kelsey was my best friend. What kind of person doubts the two people they love most? But love doesn't erase reality. And sometimes trusting someone becomes the blindfold they use to hurt you. The day I went into labor, Jake drove me to the hospital. He held my hand. He kissed my forehead. He said, "I'm so proud of you." And when the contractions became unbearable, I screamed his name. He whispered, "You've got this, Em. I'm right here." What I didn't know was that when our daughter was born, while I lay in recovery, exhausted and filled with love, he wasn't holding my hand anymore. He was back at our house, with her, in our bed. The bed we conceived our daughter in. I didn't find out right away. The next few days were a blur of feeding schedules, painkillers, and visitors. Kelsey didn't visit once. She said she was giving us space. I remember feeling grateful for her thoughtfulness. The irony makes me sick now. It was a week later after we returned home that I found it. Jake's phone was left charging on the nightstand. I wasn't snooping. I was looking for a photo he'd taken of me and our daughter. The phone wasn't locked. And there it was. A message from Kelsey, timestamped the night I was in labor. "I still smell you in the sheets." I froze. My vision tunneled. I scrolled further. Dozens of messages, photos, videos, jokes I hadn't heard before, nicknames I didn't recognize, and then one message that shattered whatever denial I had left. "You should have stayed here with me. She'll never find out." I looked up from the screen. He was in the living room rocking our daughter. I wanted to scream, to rip the phone across the room, but instead I walked back to the hallway, sat on the floor, and shook. Because the pain didn't come from just him. It came from her too. My best friend. My sister in everything but blood. The betrayal wasn't just physical. It was intimate, layered, surgical. They had watched me decorate the nursery, pick out baby names, cry over swollen feet, and then lie to my face. Over and over again. This was the beginning of the unraveling, and I hadn't even spoken a word yet. Part 2, the quiet before the storm. I didn't confront him that night. Somehow I managed to hold it together. I rocked our daughter in the same chair he had just been sitting in, her tiny breath warming my chest while the weight of the messages on his phone crushed my ribs like stones. My mind raced, but my body moved slowly, numb with disbelief. Every part of me was screaming, but I said nothing. I needed to understand the full truth before I set fire to what we had built. The next morning, I told Jake I wanted to take a nap while the baby slept. I kissed his cheek, told him I was exhausted. He smiled like nothing was wrong, like he wasn't the reason I hadn't slept a second all night. He left for the store an hour later. I knew he was lying, just like I now knew what those extra work meetings had really been. As soon as his car pulled out of the driveway, I called Kelsey. She didn't pick up. Of course she didn't. But 2 minutes later, she texted, "Hey, can't talk right now. Everything okay?" I didn't reply. I couldn't. My hands were shaking too hard. But that lie, so casual, so polished, made something snap inside me. This wasn't a one-time lapse. This was planned, sustained, and worst of all, protected. They'd covered for each other while I was in the most vulnerable state of my life. I opened Jake's laptop. He never changed the password. Still our wedding anniversary. I didn't even have to search. The tabs were still open. Google searches for discreet hotel rooms 2 towns over. A bookmarked folder labeled work receipts filled with dinner confirmations. For 2. I saw her name on Uber receipts. Twice she had been dropped off at our address while I was still in the hospital recovering from birth. One of the rides was billed at 1:12 a.m. I wanted to vomit. I thought about how I had texted him that night, thanking him for loving me, telling him I couldn't wait to come home. I even remembered saying something about how lucky I was to have a husband and best friend who supported me. The silence in our house felt different now. Not peaceful, not sleepy, but haunted. When Jake returned, I was sitting at the dining table with his laptop open and my phone next to me. I didn't cry, I didn't scream, I simply said, "You need to sit down." His eyes shifted, not in confusion, but in fear. That's when I knew he wasn't sorry he cheated. He was sorry he got caught. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe to lie, maybe to stall, but I cut him off. "Don't speak, just listen." I read aloud one message after another. His face drained of color. When I got to the one that said, "I miss your mouth," he flinched. I wanted to hurt him more than I'd ever wanted anything in my life. He started crying. I didn't. His tears meant nothing. He talked about stress, loneliness, needing an outlet while I was pregnant. I asked him, "Did you need an outlet while I was in labor?" He couldn't answer. I stood up and walked out. I didn't know where I was going. I left the baby monitor on the table. I left him standing there. I drove 2 blocks before pulling over and sobbing into the steering wheel so hard I thought I would pass out. Because this wasn't just about betrayal. It was about contempt. It was about the people I loved most, treating me like I was disposable, even while I gave everything to bring a life into this world. That night, I stayed at my sister's house. Jake called 14 times. I didn't pick up. Kelsey didn't call once. But the next morning, she texted me, "I'm sorry, it wasn't supposed to happen. Please don't hate me." Not, "It was a mistake." Not, "I love you." Just, "Don't hate me." I looked at the message, then at my newborn daughter sleeping beside me. Her little lips pursed like she was dreaming of something warm and safe. And I realized I couldn't afford to break down. I had to become a mother in every sense now, even if that meant being alone. Part 3, 1,000 Little Goodbyes. I moved back into the house the next day. Not because I forgave him. I hadn't. Not because I wanted to fix things. I didn't. But because our daughter's bassinet, bottles, and clothes were there, and I refused to live like a visitor in my own life. Jake tried everything. He bought flowers, cooked dinner, offered to go to therapy. He held the baby like nothing had happened. He sang the lullaby I used to hum to her when I was pregnant. I watched him from across the room and wondered how someone could look like the man I loved and feel like a stranger I feared. He said things like, "I made a terrible mistake. I lost myself. She meant nothing." But I had meant everything. And he threw me away anyway. One night, he reached across the bed to touch my shoulder. I didn't flinch. I didn't cry. I simply asked, "Did you tell her you loved her?" He hesitated, and that hesitation was louder than a scream. I got out of bed, took my pillow and blanket, and went to sleep on the floor in our daughter's room. Her tiny breaths were all the comfort I needed now. Every morning after that, I made a decision. Not to scream, not to beg, not to demand anything from him. I simply watched. Watched the way he acted like we were still a family. Watched him try to rewrite the story of what he'd done. Watched the guilt wear him down like rust on a frame, and I started preparing. I met with a lawyer. I set up a savings account in my name. I packed a little every day while he was at work. Baby clothes, old photos, the books that had once comforted me. I didn't want to explode. I wanted to exit like smoke slipping under the door, invisible, but gone all the same. I didn't tell many people what happened. Most didn't ask. Kelsey vanished from our mutual circles like she'd never existed. But silence filled the space where friendship once lived. The kind of silence that doesn't comfort, it accuses. My mother was the only one who said what I couldn't yet. He made a choice, she told me. You don't need to understand it to know it was wrong. The final straw came on a quiet Thursday afternoon. Jake came home early with takeout from my favorite restaurant. He smiled, hopeful, like he thought all the good behavior had earned him a reset. He placed the food on the table and said, "I think we're turning a corner." I looked at him for a long time before I replied. Then calmly I said, "I've already signed the divorce papers." His face crumpled. He didn't shout. He didn't beg. He simply sat down, stunned, like someone had finally told him the truth he'd been avoiding all along. I left with the baby 3 days later. No dramatic fight, no slammed doors. Just the sound of a woman walking away from the fire she didn't start, and choosing not to burn with it. Part 4. The quiet aftermath. The hardest part about leaving wasn't the logistics. It wasn't the packing, or the custody paperwork, or even the awkward calls to family members who didn't know what to say. It was the quiet, the stillness after years of chaos. No more whispered arguments behind closed doors. No more walking on eggshells. No more pretending. I moved into a modest 2-bedroom apartment on the other side of town. Not far enough to feel truly free, but far enough that the air felt different, lighter, even if only slightly. Daniel adjusted quicker than I did. Children are like that. They adapt when they're given love and stability. I decorated his room first, hanging his dinosaur posters and laying out his favorite books. I told him this was our adventure, and in a way I had to believe that too. But at night, after he fell asleep, I'd sit by the window and feel the weight of everything I had lost. Not just a husband, but the version of myself that believed in forever. Jake wasn't cruel in the divorce proceedings. He didn't fight me on custody or assets. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of fear, or maybe because deep down he knew he didn't deserve to. He saw Daniel on weekends. Sometimes I watched from the window as they walked to the car. Daniel would wave excitedly, and Jake would look up at my apartment like he wanted to say something. But I never gave him the chance. I didn't need closure. What I needed was peace. One evening, a few months later, I ran into Kelsey, of all places, at a grocery store. She was alone. No makeup, no smug smile, just her, small and quiet and very human. We locked eyes near the produce aisle, and time stood still. I expected rage. I expected her to turn away, but she walked toward me. "I'm sorry," she said before I could speak. I didn't answer. "I didn't think it would go this far," she continued. "I didn't think you'd leave." That made me laugh, bitter, sharp, and too loud for the setting. "You thought I'd just stay?" I asked. She looked away. "He said you'd never leave him, that you needed him." I stared at her. This woman who had once held my baby at dinner parties, toasted our anniversaries, cried with me after my miscarriage. And now, here she was, a footnote in the story of my survival. "I don't need him," I said clearly. "I never did. I just loved him. That's different." She looked like she wanted to say more. Maybe beg forgiveness. Maybe justify the unjustifiable. But I had no more space inside me for her words. I turned and walked away. That moment didn't bring closure, but it brought clarity. I started writing again. Not journals, real writing, stories, reflections. Articles about resilience, trust, motherhood, and betrayal. I submitted one anonymously to a magazine. It got published. Then another and another. I wasn't just rebuilding my life. I was reclaiming my voice. And slowly, I began to see myself not as the woman who had been cheated on, but the woman who walked away and thrived. Jake tried one more time. He sent a letter, handwritten. 4 pages, no begging, no excuses, just acknowledgement. He wrote, "You didn't just leave our marriage. You left the worst version of me. I didn't even realize how far I'd fallen until you were gone." I read it once, then I put it away. Not to keep, not to forgive, but to remember that healing doesn't come from the person who hurt you. It comes from the person you become after. Part 5. The strength I never asked for strength doesn't announce itself. It doesn't arrive wrapped in glory or dressed for war. It sneaks in when you're exhausted, crying on a kitchen floor with a bottle of unopened wine and a pile of unpaid bills. It whispers, "You're still here." That was me, a year after I left. I wasn't healed. I wasn't glowing with empowerment. I was tired. I was lonely. But I was no longer broken. Daniel had started school. He came home every day with stories of playground adventures and new best friends. His laughter filled the apartment, anchoring me to purpose. He was thriving, and somehow that felt like enough. One night he asked me if Daddy still loved me. I paused. Kids have a way of cutting straight to the core with innocence sharp enough to wound. I think he did, I answered slowly, in the only way he knew how. Do you love him? I looked at my son, this tiny soul who watched everything, who noticed what I didn't say more than what I did. No, I said gently, not anymore. But I did. Very much. He nodded and went back to his cereal like he'd just asked me what time it was. That moment stayed with me. I had feared for so long that my pain would be his legacy, that he'd grow up carrying the burden of his father's betrayal. But kids, they don't cling to what we lose, they cling to what we give them. And I was giving him love, safety, honesty. That had to be enough. I didn't date for a long time. It wasn't fear, it was disinterest. I was learning how to love my own company, how to fill my evenings without someone else's validation. I planted herbs on my balcony. I took up painting, badly. I joined a book club where we barely read but laughed until we cried. My life became mine again. One night after a book club meeting, a woman named Marlene asked, "When did you know you were okay?" I didn't answer right away. Then I said, "When I stopped needing to be." There's this myth that healing has a destination, that one day you'll wake up and be over it. No more tears, no more triggers, just peace. But it's not like that. Some days I still flinch when I hear his name. Some nights I still dream about the life we were supposed to have. But the difference is, it no longer defines me. I am not the woman whose husband cheated. I am the woman who chose herself. The woman who raised her son with honesty and kindness. The woman who broke the silence. It took me 2 years to take off my wedding ring. I wasn't wearing it for him. I wasn't even wearing it for what we used to be. I was wearing it because I thought taking it off meant failure. But failure isn't walking away from betrayal. Failure is staying in the fire and pretending you're not burning. So I took it off. I buried it in a small box under a sycamore tree behind our old church. Not out of hate, not out of spite, out of release. If you're reading this and you've been betrayed, if you've ever sat in your car after discovering the truth and screamed until your throat bled, if you've ever felt like a ghost in your own life, you're not alone. You are not what they did to you. You are who you decide to become after.